Chapter 16. Friday evening. As Doreen and her animals strolled home, she pondered through the muddle of information from Nan. Doreen didn't know if Nan had been really tired today or just upset because of Maisie. But either way, Nan's mind had been definitely irrational. Was Nan getting Alzheimer's? How she could possibly ask her grandmother to go to the doctor to get some testing done, she didn't know, because she would be more than a little horrified and insulted to hear about Doreen's train of thought. But really, with all this muddling of conversations, it was harder to sort out what was true and what was false. Maisie had obviously hurt Nan with the affair with Joe. At least that was Doreen's take on it. Still, her grandmother would get over it, like she'd gotten over many other breakups in her life. Maybe Nan was more upset that Joe had chosen Maisie as Nan's replacement, and not somebody else. It was amazing how many times people were okay with a lover going off and dallying with somebody else, as long as the previous lover approved of the someone else. Doreen wandered home contemplating this Hornby character. When she got to her house, she found an unfamiliar vehicle parked out front. She walked around the back of the vehicle and took a quick photo of the license plate. As she walked up to the front door to see where he might be sitting or waiting for her, she found nobody there. She walked around to the backyard with Muggs sniffing heavily at her feet and found a late middle-aged man sitting on her back steps. As she approached, he hopped up and gave her a big wide smile. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she cautiously said in response. "What can I do for you?" "For one, you can stop poking into things that don't have anything to do with you." "Such as?" Her head tilted as she studied him. He had to be about 50 years old, maybe a little older. "I'm Hornby, Alan Hornby," he said, "and you keep asking questions about me." "Who would have told you that?" "You gotta understand the old folks' home," he said. "Richie told my Aunt Velma that you were asking questions." "I am," she said, "because nobody has seen Johnny since he disappeared." "What does that got to do with me?" he asked. "And Johnny disappeared decades ago." "Maybe nothing," Doreen said. "I was trying to cross the T's and dot the I's. Apparently you were in the car with Susan when you saw another vehicle swipe the two guys driving Johnny's car. Is that correct?" He frowned, his head also tilting to the side as he studied her. "What business is it of yours? Where did you hear that?" "I heard it," she said, "while I was visiting Nan. I think it came from Richie because that was his great niece who was in the vehicle with you." Hornby glared. "Man, I tell you. Those old folks, if they don't have something to gossip about, they make up something to gossip about," he said. "Isn't that the truth?" she said. "But so far, you haven't answered the question." "You're right there," he said, "because to be truthful, I can't remember anymore." He tapped his head. "It was a long time ago." "You don't remember whether you saw two good friends die in a fiery crash of a stolen vehicle, right in front of you?" Talk about suspicious. Not that she had proof the vehicle had been stolen, but there was also no proof Johnny had sold it either. She studied Hornby, looking for any signs of deceit. The trouble was, he had that big beaming smile that said he knew she had no proof, and that with the girl dead, nobody knew anything, so he could say whatever the hell he wanted. "Nope, my memory is not very good anymore," he said. "Too much booze and drugs." That was just possible enough for her to consider it. "It's a little hard to believe you don't remember any of it," she said. "I remember Johnny's disappearance," Hornby said, "mostly because it was on all our minds for such a long time. We had absolutely no way of knowing what happened to him. And we all wanted to know." "Did you though?" she asked. "Did you, really?" He glared at her. "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know what I'm suggesting," she said honestly. "But think about it. Johnny disappears. You have two good friends die in a fiery crash in front of you in Johnny's car. Followed by what? Who was driving the vehicle that ran them off the road? The police never found out, he said. And I don't understand what difference it makes all these years later. They're still dead. Maybe it doesn't make any difference. Maybe it was an accident. Then again, maybe it wasn't, she said. But it makes a difference, since Penny still has no idea what happened to her brother-in-law. The humor drained from his face. Hornby nodded. I know George was completely cracked up about it. George and Johnny were close. They were close, she said, according to Penny. But were they close according to Johnny? Hornby took a minute to process that, then he nodded. Yeah, I think they were. Johnny hung on to George as the stalwart part of his world. Once their father passed away, it was just the two of them. He had a medallion he got from his father. He wore it all the time. Played with it sometimes around his neck. It was like a piece of his father that Johnny carried with him. We found that, Doreen said. We found it broken in the yard where he was last seen. Alan just stared at her. She could see him withdrawing slightly inside. Was he looking down memory lane? How much did he care about that medallion? She asked. He'd never take it off, he said. And I mean never. She nodded. So, considering we found the medallion, and we found his dagger too, by the way, we have to wonder what happened to Johnny. He was probably killed by a drug dealer, Hornby snapped. He was always trying to score drugs for us. Maybe, she said. But in that case, there'd be a body. Not if the drug dealer was scared of what he'd done, and decided to take the body and deep six it somewhere. Deep six it, she said conversationally. That sounds more like dropping it into the ocean. Considering we live by a lake, he said in a dry tone, I hardly think the ocean would come into play. Point taken, she said with a big smile. However, I think after all this time, the body probably would have shown up again. But then she remembered the vehicle she had just found with a little boy, and the older man. Unless he drowned in the lake inside a vehicle. In which case, Hornby said, it should have been his own vehicle because then he'd have made a clean getaway and nobody would ever know what happened to him. True. Stumped, she just stood here. If you're trying to find a killer, he said gently, you're barking up the wrong tree. We were all messed up back then. Johnny was messed up back then. George was the mainstay in his life, but they fought all the time. Just like all brothers fight. Understood. Thanks for answering the questions. He chuckled. No problem. How about a cup of coffee? He motioned his arm toward her kitchen. She hesitated, not really sure why. He saw the hesitation and chuckled. I guess you're Mac's property then, huh? He hopped up, gave her a mock salute, and walked away.